Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's show. Today's show, I actually have a special guest. Harleen Kaur is the person on the podcast today, and I'm not entirely sure if that's exactly how you pronounce her name, but she did correct me on the show. But ultimately, I wanted to have this individual on because I think she is a quintessential next level human. I've been using a tool that she has built for all of us, a tool that as you all know, I am huge on truth, bias, and dogma for many, many reasons. I think it is the quintessential aspect of being a next level human. It's what comes first. It is the first principle of a next level human. We need to understand truth. We need to work past our bias and dogma, because those 2 things cut the legs off of truth. And one of the things that we're currently dealing with in our current world is distorted truths. People purposely lying and purposely propagating false information. And we deal with social media feeds that are propagated with only the things that they think we want to hear. And what this does is it keeps us in our bubble. One of the things that I've been doing, and I've mentioned it before, is I've been purposely doing things to get me out of that bubble because I'm terrified of not having the truth. I would rather have truth than to win. And I think one of the things that we're having is most people would rather promote their team over truth, and therefore they'll lie for the benefit of their team, political team, country, etc. They will literally forego truth so that they can seem like the smartest, the best, or whatever. And also purposely deceive people and also spread on conspiracy theories and unproven things. And so from my perspective, when we make things up that we have not validated ourselves, and we pass things on that we have not vetted properly, then what we are doing is we are adding to the falseness of all this stuff that's going around. It is a form of lying and a form of immorality, in my opinion. Now, of course, we're all biased. We all have dogma. We all do this to a degree. But the first step is seeing it and doing something about it. So what Harleen has done is she has taken all the news sources that are out there, and she has basically assigned them, and she's actually not doing this. Third parties that do this for a living do this, and she will tell you more about this as we get into this discussion. And she is actually serving up for us all the news information, all the different biases, center, left, right, as well as different geographical locations in the way that they are reporting the news, and collating all this information for us in a way that we can easily access it and be able to then see through our biased bubbles. And to me, this is huge. These are the kind of tools that we need as next level humans to understand truth. And so without further ado, let's get into the discussion with Harleen. All right, everybody, welcome to today's show. I have a special guest. She's incredibly sweet, showed up sort of last minute for me. This is Harleen. And Harleen, tell me how to pronounce your last name. Is it Kaur?
Car is good. Yeah.
Car is good. Okay, so let me
Yeah.
tell you all about Harleen. And Harleen, you haven't heard this story, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute. But I found you because I have been on this tear of trying to figure out what is the truth in media. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I hear sort of all the time, I tend to be one of these people that is sort of politically center. I lean slightly left. But I really am interested in finding out how different people are reporting things. And I hear from my left leaning friends that the news is biased to the right. And I hear from my right leaning friends that the news is
Yeah.
biased to the left.
Yeah.
And I've been sort of doing my own, before I came across you, I was doing my own sort of way of trying to get out of my bubble. And what I was doing was populating my Facebook feed with all right leaning media and right leaning sources so that when I came on Facebook, for example, I would get the right, sort of
Mm-hmm.
political right side of the picture. And I populate my Twitter feed with more of the left leaning side of the picture. And this is
Very
sort of
interesting.
what I was doing until someone introduced me to you and Ground News. So for those of you listening, Harleen is the CEO and founder of Ground News, which essentially takes, and I'm going to let her explain a little bit more about this, but essentially is doing for me what I was trying to do on my own in a much better way. And so I guess the first thing I want to know, Harleen, from you is why don't you just introduce us, give us an idea of your story, who you are, where you came from. I know you have an interesting background. I was reading about you at NASA. You were working for a little while, but you obviously saw this as a problem and took it upon yourself to do something about it, which is what I call the quintessential next level human. But tell us how you got started and why you think this is so important.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Thanks for firstly having me, and it's great to be talking with you. Um, so yeah, the problem, as you said, was very much that I was facing every day, and I realized everybody around me was facing the same problem. Is that why can we not agree on what's really going on in the media? That is like, why can't we understand what is actually a piece of news? Why do me as a news consumer have to do the work and the kind of work you're describing, that you were doing on Facebook and Twitter, that we have to do on our side to be able to understand what's really the full picture news? And that's why I created Ground. Yeah, the personal story there. I did work at NASA for a bit, and working as a space engineer. It's mind-boggling that we can have satellites and spacecrafts that can look at Earth at 24 hours a day and tell you what's going on with high level of accuracy. But at the same time, we don't have a news reporting system that does the same for us. So I wanted to create Ground News for an average news consumer who doesn't have a journalistic background and who's not going to spend the entire day trying to figure out what's really going on, and want to use 5-10 minutes and still be presented with all the facts you're needed to know to understand what really is going on in a news story. So that's why the idea of Ground News came around, and we've been working on it for 3 years now, and trying to put it in hands of people. And now it's great to get appreciated and having supporters like you.
Yeah, I am just blown away by this tool, and it's one of these things that I was thinking along the same lines. And don't you love it when you're kind of thinking this and you're struggling with a problem, and then
Yes.
someone literally solves it for you? So I've been telling everyone about this service, and it's interesting you mentioned the NASA thing. I was reading, I think it was a blog post that you posted on Medium that you were talking about how
Hmm.
when you were working there you were using satellites to help insurance companies with insurance fraud. You were
Yes.
using satellites to spot leaky pipes for cities. You were doing things that were, really particular and exact. And
Yeah.
yet then you come to this idea of like, well, I don't even know what I can believe or not believe when it comes to the news. And so let me ask you this: before Ground News, and when you were struggling with the same problem that I'm struggling with, and the rest of us were struggling with, and before you came up with this solution, how are you going about
Hmm.
finding truth and breaking through sort of your own bias and dogma? Because obviously you're an interesting human, I can already tell, because not every human wants to get outside of their bubble. Most of us want to
Yes.
stay in it. So what is it about Harleen that sort of made you question this and really want to understand the other sides?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's you're absolutely right that it's very uncomfortable for all of us, no matter who we are, to look outside our bubble, right? Because I want to hang out with people, I want to read things that I agree with, and that is much more easy for me. My In my personal experience, I have actually lived in quite a few countries. I've worked in a lot of places, and have friends from a lot of different parts of the world as well. And that what that lends itself to is people having different opinions. So, and I like the fact that I surround myself with people who have different opinions, who don't agree with me, because then that can inform me more, that can enrich my life more. And it was interesting that and again, being in that bubble, you just think that there is one way that things are getting reported, and this is what I agree with. But when you talk to somebody else who has a different bias or a different viewpoint, or is coming from a different geopolitical landscape, and they share with you something different, you're like, okay, this is very different than my understanding of things. So I was doing something very similar to what you described. I was trying to open like 20 tabs on my computer and opening different news sources and saying, hey, okay, let me read what CNN said. Let me see what Fox said. Let me see what an international perspective of BBC might be for this piece of news, or an Asian perspective of this news. Let me go to something like South China Morning Post. So I found myself doing exactly this and opening 20 different browser windows and then trying to compare exactly the same piece of news. And that's how we ended up making ground to save people like me from opening 20 browser windows and spending their time and comparing that, and just putting all of that on their fingertips, and they can do that same exercise within matter of seconds, as opposed to spending half an hour doing that.
Yeah, I love this whole sort of thought process because that's one of the things about I was certainly only looking at this through the lens of the political right and the political left in the United States. And one of the things that I love that you're doing is you're actually saying, well, no, not only that, let's see how different parts of the world are
Mm-hmm.
covering the same information, and let's also look at how local news is covering this information. It's funny because when I would go
Absolutely.
and read these things, I could spot the bias sometimes, right? You can almost spot the bias in
Mm-hmm.
the title of the article almost. But what I love about what's happening with Ground News is I just get on there and I can filter this via bias, via region, right? And there's a couple other filters, but I always love putting on the bias filter because then I can just swipe and go, okay, left leaning, left
Absolutely.
leaning, left leaning, right leaning. This is a center. And I picked up some of this, just through my own reading. Like I always thought Associated Press, Reuters, people like that were more center. And I was
Mm-hmm.
looking at places like Breitbart and the Daily Wire as obviously being more right. And I did see CNN and some of these other ones as being slightly left. And of course, it's not, always the case, but in general, that's the case. And what I'm curious about is I was picking up some of these things, but you seem to be able to aggregate all of these things and say, these are the right leaning news sources in general. These are the center ones, and these are the left leaning. Can you give us any insight into how that is being done? I know you guys, I think, work with All Sides has a way of doing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering what all goes into that categorization of clarifying or, quantifying, qualifying these particular news
Mm-hmm.
agencies.
Yeah, yeah, and that is very important, as you're pointing out. How do we put these on a scale? So, firstly and foremost, we don't pass any judgment. We at Ground News have decided that we don't want our own bias to seep into the product and be presented to the consumers. So, what we are doing is we are taking ratings from three different third party organizations who do this bias rating for a living. So All Sides, as you mentioned, is one of them, and the other one is called Media Bias Fact Checked, and the third one is Adfontes. So we are taking a statistical average to be as neutral as possible and saying, hey, these three different rating agencies are doing this. Let us take an average and let's see where a news outlet falls on that spectrum. And if these agencies, and they do update the bias ratings, when they update it, we update our ratings as well. So the analogy that I like to use to think of it is, so say you want to go see a movie or watch a movie on Netflix and you want to see how good it is. You Google a particular movie name and then you see there's ratings from IMDb, there's ratings from Rotten Tomatoes, there's ratings from Metacritic. So what Ground is doing is we are just averaging the three ratings for, in this case, the bias ratings for the news outlets, and just taking the average of it and saying, hey, even if one of this hasn't gotten it particularly spot on, having taking a statistical average makes our chances of getting it closer to the truth much more. So that's how we are taking the bias ratings as of today.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because one of the things I also read about what you're doing is there's different aspects to this. One was crowdsourcing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
basically just if someone's passing it along, then obviously people tend to think, well, it's getting passed along, it must be true. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case.
Yes,
And then there's this algorithm type of thing where it's sort of like you get fed back to you the things that you seem interested in, and both of these seem to blind us and keep us in our own bubble and bias. And it seems like what you're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but what you're essentially doing is you're saying, okay, let's take all these news agencies, let's use these three rating systems. We don't do it ourselves. We're going to average those, and then we're going to feed up all of the different news organizations' stories to let the end user ultimately choose. And this to me is very different because
exactly.
it seems like you're trusting the user to say, listen, we're just going to
Exactly.
give you the raw data. Now it's up to you to see all the different aspects of this. Am I getting that right?
You are getting it absolutely right. So one of the important principles that we adhere to is user empowerment. So as you said, we want to treat our news consumers, news readers as adults, people who use common sense and don't need to be spoon fed with a particular news, or we don't need to extract it for them or any of it. All we want to do is present them with all the information possible in as frictionless and easy format as possible. And then it's up to them and make up their mind and say, okay, I see how in this case left has exaggerated the headline. And I see in this case how right has equivocated some of the important facts. So I can wrap my head around, given I can see these 5 different headlines or 20 different headlines in a very short time span, and I'm going to make up my own mind. I'm not going to let a social media algorithm decide for me that, okay, this is what I spent more time reading, so I'm going to get more of the same stuff, so I feel comfortable about it. And so, as you described it, exactly is how we are going about it.
Yeah, I see. It's funny. I see you guys have these four key principles that are guiding you. And if you don't mind, I'd just love to go through them real quickly. Like,
Of
so you
course.
have principle number one is impervious, principle number two, that this is scalable, three, ubiquitous, and four, this is agnostic. And so when we talk about impervious, so what you're saying here is no matter what the political leanings of the ground news users, the platform's political center of gravity does not shift. So this is one of the core things that you were doing. Is there anything you want to kind of say more about that? Because I feel like these four principles speak to me as well, because it's almost like what you seem to be doing is going into this and saying, hey, listen, Jade, I know that I have bias. We all do as humans. And we're going to do everything
Exactly.
we can to protect ourselves against that bias and to protect the users against our bias and the users against their own bias by feeding this up this particular way. And so to me, I'm wondering if you have anything else that you kind of want to point us to in these sort of four key principles, because to me, they really lay out very clearly the intent of what you're doing with ground news.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing the principles up, because I think it reflects our mission very, very well. And as you said, we fully recognize that, including us, we all have bias. And how can we rise above those bias and present something that, no matter what your leaning is today, you come into Ground, you pick up Ground, you read it, you leave more informed, and you don't feel like I want you to, two things. I want you to feel that when you left more informed than what you came in with. And second, I want to make sure that whatever your political leanings is, whatever your biases, that is being reflected as well. So nobody feels like their viewpoints are being left out of the different perspectives that we are showing people. So I always ask people, like, can you please write to us if you think that if there are certain news sources that we are missing out out on, because we have 50,000 of them today and we keep adding more and more. We want to make sure that everybody's news source and everybody's opinion is reflected on ground.
Yeah, Harleen, that's one of the things that I was amazed by. It's amazing how your aggregator is pulling so many viewpoints down. Like there's everything. It seems like every journal,
Yes.
every magazine, every
Yes.
article piece is here on Ground News. And I guess one of the things I wanted to sort of ask you about is, and this is more sort of going into opinion. So maybe you feel comfortable sharing, maybe you don't, and I can share some of my opinion here. But one of the things is here, what do you think, just as your own sort of opinion and how it reflects on Ground News or not, about the current climate is what's going on currently with the current climate? Like, what would be, I guess the question would be, what would be your hope that Ground News would be attacking mainly? Though, and to kind of get you started with this, the way I sort of see this is that, and I'm just curious for you, I tend to see that truth is the highest primary principle, right? There's a reason that
Mhm.
it's the thing that in every culture we tend to put truth above everything else. And it seems to me that the truth is then shaded in sort of our news forms. It's funny because I have and I, like you, love having friends who push me. I have some
Mhm.
on the extreme right, some on the extreme left. Most of my closest friends tend to be in the middle, like me, and like this kind of debate. But one of the things that I oftentimes hear is, as soon as I present something to someone about a news source, they will say, well, that's biased, and then they'll give me their news source, right?
Mhm.
Then I'm like, how
Yeah.
do we know that one's biased and one isn't? And I guess the question then becomes, do you feel like this tool, as it currently sits, is good enough to do the job, or do you feel like it's going to need to evolve given this sort of the problem that we're having? I'm just curious on your thoughts around this, because obviously
Yeah.
you've thought about it way more than I have and built a tool to help us with this.
Yeah, one of the objectives of building this tool was exactly uh, facilitating those conversations that you're talking about, right? So, say if I have a friend who comes from or a neighbor or somebody, an uncle, whoever it is in my life, and I run across them who reads a totally different news source that you're describing, but if I had never read that, I would not be able to have a informed conversation with them and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. You read this piece of news that I read from this perspective, and you read it from another perspective. So let's have that discourse. Let's have that discussion, and let's have a rational conversation about it. I think not, that's what we intended Ground to do, to be able to be that bridge so that you can see the other person's viewpoint, understand it, and have that conversation. I think what's happening in the world today, and that's what we're hoping to resolve, is people are shying away from that conversation. So people are saying, okay, my differences are so big compared to so big to be resolved, and so there's no point having this conversation. There are families who are divided, there are friends who are getting divided, and I think the answer is having actually a discussion, and not thinking that the other side or other person's viewpoint is not important, or not even not relevant at all. So yeah, I definitely think Ground is a part of the solution of when you sit around the Thanksgiving dinner table, or Thanksgiving dinner table, then you can have that conversation and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, because you must have read this, and let me show you what you missed out of that news source. So, yeah, that's our thinking.
I love that. So I guess the last question I would love to ask is for people who are going to be now being introduced to this tool. How would you suggest we use it? Are there any sort of things that you would say, listen, guys, when you're interacting with Ground News, here's the way that I think that you should be using this tool. Here's the things that I should be thinking about, and what is your hope in terms of
Mhm.
how we are all using this?
Very good question. So one of the things I want people to try to look beyond, and what you were mentioning earlier, Jade, was people say, "Oh, this news is left news. This news is right." To if you're reading Ground News, try to look beyond the bias labels. Don't get hung up on if CNN is left versus far left versus lean left. Just try to read as many different perspectives and not try to criticize exact label. The only point of labels is to be able to show you the entire spectrum. And again, we try to keep it as the bias ratings as neutral as possible and are taking an average, but we still get people who get hung up on the rating and say, no, I don't care for reading ground news because you only, again, going on with the CNN example, you only call them lean left versus they should be far left. That's not the point. The point is that the story that CNN is presenting is going to be widely different than what, say, NPR or Reuters or Fox is presenting. So read the different news points. Yeah, the other thing I would love to share is we just recently launched a product for a browser extension. We realize it's going to be very, very hard for people to change their news consumption journey and only read news on ground news. So we have invested heavily and made this browser extension that you just install on your computer, and no matter where you read your news, if especially on social media. So if you come across a piece of news on social media, say Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, we will show you what's the bias rating of news source that you just came across, and then how many different perspectives are there. So you actively don't have to do any work, but it's there. It's a free tool. You can download it for free. We actually are not charging anything for it whatsoever. And it's just going to be a hand-holding companion, especially when you are on the wild internet trying to consume news, especially on social media. And it just shows you the different bias and that the same story can be presented in many different ways, and for you to be aware of that. So I would love for your listeners to be able to try that tool out.
Oh, Harleen, I really just have to say, and I don't know how many people have said this to you, but I just freaking adore you and people like you. I mean,
You.
seriously, I
Thank you
mean,
very much.
you're an extraordinary human to be able to, because I know you have your bias and I know how you have your way of looking at things, and to come out with this tool for all of us to protect us all from your bias and everyone else's bias is just an amazing thing that you've done. So thank you so much for being here and for for my tardiness. Harleen was chasing me around and I was like going crazy, and she made herself available. So I so appreciate you. Let
No
me just
worries.
say before I let you go that your team actually gave a code to get a free month, I think, of Ground News of the Pro version, and it's for those of you listening. That code is Next Level times Ground. So capital NEXT, capital LEVL, lowercase x, and then capital GROUND. And also, Harleen just told us about this tool. So I assume we can get that by going to groundnews.com and downloading it.
Oh, ground.news. So
Yep.
ground.news. That's the website. Yeah, you
Okay.
can just go there and download it for free. So there are links.
Ground.news. So you can go and download that extension. And Harleen, any other things that you want to leave us with? I'm so grateful for your generosity.
No, I really, really appreciate. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and yeah, thank you for supporting us. And I'm delighted to have come across people who are supporting us on this mission.
Yeah, we're so grateful, and we will talk to you soon. Good luck, and thank you for your work, and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Jade.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed your time with Harleen as much as I did. I wanted to take a second before we close out this episode just to go over a few things and talk a little bit about why this is so important. If you did not pick up on it, or if you have not listened to the episode on bias and dogma, and let me tell you which episode that is. It was 2 episodes ago on this show, and it was all about bias and dogma. Episode 82, I recorded that on October 2nd. That's when it came out of 2020. And the title is Bias, Dogma, Ignorance, and Arrogance. Well, one of the things and one of the major points I made in that particular episode is that bias and dogma render intelligence mute, basically. Renders intelligence useless. It keeps us from the truth. And we are all of us, susceptible to this. Nobody gets away without bias. So bias and dogma, I oftentimes say, are the parents of ignorance and arrogance. one of the things this tool does, and why I think it is so incredibly important, is allows us to overcome our bias and dogma and be able to see right in front of us the way the other side is reporting this. So we are not being impacted by ground news and their bias and dogma. They're just simply showing us what our bubbles would otherwise not let us to see. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful, right? And so no longer can we say, well, okay, this particular fact-checking site is politically biased. All we have to do is go to ground news, look at how the left's reporting things, look at how the center is reporting things, look at how the right is reporting things, look at how different countries and different regions of the world are reporting this, looking at how local versus national versus global are reporting this, and we can get more of a truth. And so this is a critical tool that I think we all need to be next level humans and help other people be next level humans. So please make sure you go download Ground News, the Ground News app. You can go to ground.news. And let me just make sure that's the right website for you real quick. I'm just going to type it in here. www.ground.news. And that's the website to go to. Now, I have this app on my phone, so you can go into the App Store, download the Ground News app. But if you go to ground.news, and then over in the right-hand corner, you'll see a little subscribe today. You can click on that. I am a supporter, so they have the Pro, which is $9.99, the Premium, $29.99, and the Supporter, which is $29.99. Of course, this is free, but if you want to support, you get some extra features. You get a little tote bag there, and you actually can get a free month if you put in the code NextLevelxGround, and that's capital NEXT, capital LEVL, little x, capital GROUND. And so use that NextLevelxGround, next level times ground, and you'll get a free month. I am really not affiliated with this organization in any way. Harleen and I don't have a formal relationship. I am simply a user of this. I have found it very powerful for me, and I just wanted to pass it on, especially in light of what's going on in the political sphere. Before I let you go, let me tell you about our sponsors to the Next Level Human podcast. We have two of them. Please keep tuning in right here. This is important and helps support the show, and I love these companies. Cured Nutrition. Cured Nutrition is the CBD company I use. I use their product Zen to help me sleep. I use it every night. It has been huge for me in sleeping. And PaleoValley.com, the meat sticks that I use constantly. These are everywhere I go, and even my family knows that I keep these meat sticks. I'll bring them over and stash them at different people's homes so that I can have them available to me. They are huge. PaleoValley.com as well. And both of these, Cured Nutrition and Paleo Valley, if you go over to their websites and use the code NEXTLEVEL, you will get discounts on this as well. I get a little bit of a kickback to help support the show, and it's a win-win-win for all of us, for them, for you, and for me. Thanks so much for hanging out on the show, and I will see you at the next episode.